my goodness. What a busy time it is.
I know.
Busy.
I know. And I've put out a little post to say it's going to be late. So here it is.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. So busy.
Busy.
Yeah. Yes, it would be lovely if we could just concentrate on our episodes and have nothing else to do. That'd be great. But unfortunately, that is not the case.
No. Luckily, the episode is ready and raring to go. We just didn't have time to record and edit, did we?
We didn't. No.
That was the problem. So luckily,
yeah,
it's done and well worth the wait, I think.
I'm excited by the title.
Yeah.
That's not what I expected.
Okay.
I don't know what I expected, but
no. Well worth the wait. I'm going to limit the chit chat this morning just because we've got a lot to crack on with and the episode's already late. So, but I'm not going to skip random blams. So random blams, go.
Shit.
So my random blam is just something that I came across last night and I found it incredibly interesting. And it said that it was regarding weddings and why the bride holds flowers.
Oh yeah.
Why that's a tradition.
Yeah.
Do you know why?
Yeah.
Well, go on, just in case I'm wrong, what is it?
Well, I don't know it in detail, but is something to do with the smell, isn't it?
Yes, because they stank.
Yeah.
It's because they were
stinky brides.
Because it's the same as like in courtrooms why it was all flowers everywhere and why people laid flowers at graves and things like that. It's because people were only allowed to bath once. I say only allowed, they could only afford to bath once a year. So therefore the majority of the time they would be wafty.
Yeah.
So
and no one wants a wafty bride.
No one wants a wafty wedding, do they? So everybody brings flowers because
Ew.
Yeah.
Melly.
Yep.
Oh, well, my random blam is that the voice of a 3-year-old is louder than 200 adults all talking at the same time in a restaurant.
Is that a fact or is that an opinion? Is that something you've come across? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Kids are loud.
Loud. And how fitting because we've just had half term over here in the UK. Yeah. So, yeah, that's been a time.
2.5 bloody weeks.
One of ours has gone back today. The other one is upstairs watching YouTube.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Are both yours back?
Nope. Tomorrow.
What, both?
Yep.
Woo.
Me and Josie one time I think it was after the 6 weeks holidays, when it's not 6 weeks and it's like bloody 7 months that they have off. They went back to school and Josie took the day off work and we went to the beach for the day.
Yeah.
Like, see you later, suckers.
Oh, I know. It's a time. But there you go. Random blams. Done. Morning.
I was just about to take a little sip of my drink.
That's it. You have a little sip of your
little
vegetable
cucumber water, that is.
Lovely.
Supposed to be very hydrating. So I did say at the beginning, we're just going to jump straight into it. So this episode, it's taken me a little while to find an episode that makes me quite passionate. Crime Junkies and Case File and things like that, where they bang out episode, and you listen to them. Some of them are like, oh, this one's a bit boring, or that one's a bit boring, and I can't physically write an episode that doesn't engage me.
No,
I find it such a chore.
Yeah, no, I do too, and then I end up not doing it because I end up just putting it down and walking away.
You start it and think it's not really for me. But so it's taken me a little while to find an episode that's made me quite passionate, like Jonestown or Michael Crowe or Gary Heidnick and things like that. And when I find these episodes, then researching them and writing them becomes much, much easier. Yeah. And like I said, if it doesn't captivate me, then it feels like a chore, and I don't feel like I'm going to do a good job. I don't feel like I'm going to do the story justice. So I just move on to something else. So I was a bit kind of stuck in a rut for a little while with finding an episode. I was like, oh, this one's, oh no. Oh, maybe this, no. So bored into it, and I'm like, oh no. So this story came to me via recommendation, and it was recommended by a few different people. Okay. And I did a little bit of research on it, and it's an awful story, but it didn't really captivate me. I was like, yes, it's horrible, but it doesn't ask the questions that I like.
Yeah, we want to be perplexed by stories.
We want to be perplexed, and we want to be like, these questions that we have and things like that. But the more I researched it, the more perplexed I became, because at face value, it's just like, if someone told you the story, you'd be like, geez, that's horrendous. But that's what it is. Yeah. But then when you delve into it, it becomes a lot more complex than that. And I love the stories that warrant a debate, that warrant a discussion at the end. Okay. And most murder cases are a case of they've committed these horrendous acts because they're just evil, selfish people, and that's what they want to do. But this story is very, very different. And this story comes with a huge trigger warning. Like, huge.
The biggest one yet.
The biggest one yet. Details of rape, assault, childhood trauma. And I will include the details that they're horrendous, the details of the murder itself. And the reason I'm going to include them is because I feel that it's important to it, not only in helping to understand the murder, but also for the victim. And that will be clear later on. So this will be the worst description of a murder that we've covered so far, in my opinion. And before I actually get to that part in the story, I will put a little marker out so people can skip ahead if they don't want to listen to the details.
Okay.
For those that do know the story, it may feel like I'm trying to garner sympathy and justification for the actions and the murder, but in no way doing that. No. I just feel like it's very important to give all the facts of the case to help build a picture of why this happened, perhaps. And that will become the topic of discussion at the end. Intrigued?
Yes.
Okay. So let's get started then.
All right.
So Christa Gale Pike was born on the 10th of March 1976 to Carissa Hanson and Emil Glenn Pike in West Virginia. Her mother was a terrible mother since before even Christa was born. Carissa was an alcoholic, heavily dependent on drink, and that continued throughout the pregnancy. As a result, Christa was born with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and damage to her frontal lobe. So the frontal lobe is the area of the brain considered to be in charge of thought processing, decision-making, impulse control. And the damage to Christa's was so severe that it's actually visible on brain imaging scans.
Jeez.
As an infant, due to her disorder, Christa regularly suffered with seizures. And these went pretty much untreated and unmedicated for a little while, until her brain found a way to cope with them, and she essentially grew out of these seizures. Christa's mother and father were anything but a mother and father. Both were incredibly negligent to her. She was seen as an inconvenience, a disruption to their lives. Christa's mother just wanted to party and drink, and she still continued to do so, leaving infant Christa by herself in the home for long periods of time. Her aunt once found her alone in the home, crawling around in dog poo,
Oh,
because the house was never cleaned either. It was filthy and disgusting because her mum just wanted to go out and party. She didn't want to have to deal with the chores of living any other way. Her aunt also said that while she was caring for Christa, she had multiple seizures. So she rang Christa's mum to come home from the pub and take her to the hospital, but she refused because Christa never came first. Her parents always opted to put their own needs above their child, their own needs for drink and drugs and partying and whatever else they wanted to do. When Christa was around 2 years old, her parents separated. And at the age of 3, her mother tried to take her own life. And throughout her childhood, Christa was regularly left in the care of other family members, including her maternal grandmother, who was just as dependent on alcohol and who also saw Christa as an inconvenience. And she was regularly verbally and physically abused while in her care and while in everyone's care. This abuse she suffered began to show from an early age and was picked up by professionals. While at kindergarten, Christa was found to be drawing penises, a huge red flag for any child of any age. And this was brought to the attention of her parents, and they were tasked with getting Christa counselling.
is that really a big red flag then? Because
If
I think all kids draw willies, don't they?
this, it is a bit of a red flag, but also it was the fact that it was quite anatomically correct.
Ah, okay.
Is
Not
the reason
just like a
it
cartoon.
weren't just a dangly piece of thing between the legs. It was quite anatomically correct penis, and they was like, you shouldn't.
That's not
you
okay.
shouldn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was brought to the attention of her parents, and they were tasked with getting Christa counselling. A task that her parents deemed not important. They cared so little about her that they abused her. So why would they even consider getting her mental health support for the abuse that they inflicted on her?
Yeah.
So the timeline for Christa's childhood is a little bit messy. So I can give you the facts surrounding her upbringing, but not necessarily what ages they happened at.
Okay.
So we know that she was bounced around between her mother, who mentally and emotionally abused her, her father, who prioritized his new wife and child over Christa. He also physically abused her, whipping her sometimes 5 or 6 times a day with a belt.
Jesus.
He would kick her out of his house as a young teen for doing badly in school or for not doing her homework, and also for allegedly sexually abusing his 2-year-old daughter from his new wife. When she was living with her maternal grandmother, she was subjected to mental and emotional abuse with her, and she never felt cared for or loved. She would also witness the slaughter of animals while in the care of her paternal grandmother, because maternal grandmother. Her maternal grandfather had a farm, and as a young child, Christa would witness the slaughter and skinning of these animals. And these were animals that she had bonded with, like pigs, for instance, chickens, things like that. They were animals are a means of escape, aren't they? Sometimes, and they love unconditionally, and it was something that she didn't get anywhere else. So she would spend her time out of the house, away from the abuse, building these emotional connections with animals, naming them, caring for them, and then having to witness their death. So when her maternal grandmother died of alcohol-related hepatitis, she ended up living with her paternal grandmother, which was her grandmother on her father's side. And she turned out to be the only person in Christa's life that ever showed any ounce of love or any ounce of stability in her life, in her childhood. So she had time for Christa, and she didn't treat her like an inconvenience, but as the child that she was. So Christa spent a few happy years in the company of her grandmother, being looked after, away from the abuse that she suffered at literally everyone else's hands. But at the age of 12, she had to watch the only person that loved her go through the horrendous battle of cancer, getting sicker and sicker until she eventually died. To say Christa was devastated would be the biggest understatement ever. The trauma of witnessing the only person that ever loved her go through something so awful and then die led Christa to a state of disassociation, amnesia, and she fell into a huge depression. And shortly after this, by the age of 13, she tried to take her own life. But she was bounced back to living between her mother and her father. Her mother was now on her fourth husband, a man that admitted he didn't like children and used this as an excuse to physically and sexually abuse Christa. He regularly beat her with a belt and seemed to get so much satisfaction out of it that he would wake her up in the dead of night just to beat her. He also fashioned this belt himself, this beating thing, and he would hang it on her door. That was where it was kept as like a reminder. Yeah, absolutely. And he started grooming her as a preteen, mixing play fight with sexual assault to almost normalize it. So they would wrestle on the ground and he would touch her breasts, touch her bum, twist her nipples, that sort of thing.
Oh, God.
And that blurs the line for a young child. Unsure whether it's right or wrong, unsure whether it's play, whether it's not. Because Christa was used to these sexual assaults anyways. From the age of 2, it was thought that her paternal grandmother's boyfriend had been sexually abusing her, which is then why it came to the attention of professionals that she'd been drawing these penises. At the age of 9, she was raped by a neighbour, and she reported this to her classmates and teachers. And the next day, the neighbour was like, she picked this neighbour out of a lineup who eventually confessed to the rape. And despite the confession, Christa's mother failed to believe her, labelling her a compulsive liar. By age 13, her mother's then husband was also sexually assaulting her. And this abuse from the husband only ended after he punched Christa in the face. And this was reported to child services. And she was removed from the home for around 3 months. But she was returned to the family and the husband was ordered not to be alone with Christa. As a preteen and teen, Christa is described as being a compulsive liar. Her mum said she had been out of control since the age of 8 and had been growing marijuana in her bedroom by the age of 9. She also admitted that in an attempt to become friends with Christa, they would often do drugs together from the age of 13, which most teenagers would have been happy about.
Yeah.
A parent that allows you to do what you want. However, this translates as a completely negligible mother, a mother that doesn't care about her well-being at all. And Christa often reminisces about times that she would drink from the age of about 8 or 9. She would often drink with her mother, and she was able to outdrink a lot of men as well. And she says that a lot of times that she would stay up for sometimes 4 days at a time and be drinking these 4 days at a time. And her mother didn't care. She also had a father that didn't care about her well-being at all. He had a new wife and a new little daughter, and they prioritized that. They were a priority to him. And he allegedly saw Christa sexually assault his 2-year-old daughter and threw her out. And then he even went so far as to sign adoption papers so that he could just completely wipe his hands of her. But this sexual abuse by Christa on this other daughter was just alleged. However, this is a young girl with very sexually blurred boundaries. She's been essentially groomed most of her life by men that mixed play with sexual assault.
Yeah.
So it's likely that it probably did take place, but we don't know for sure.
Yeah, she probably just saw it as like
normal,
showing affection and like playing with her.
Yeah.
Because that's how she knows it.
Yeah, exactly.
Jeez.
Around the age of 14, Christa got herself a boyfriend, a deeply disturbed boy not long out of a psychiatric unit. And she became obsessed with him, and she formed a very unhealthy attachment to him. He was someone that showed her an ounce of care, and compassion, and attention, and she was enthralled by him. And he ended up living with Christa for a short while at her mother's house, where they would all do drugs together and they would all drink together and whatever else. But when her mum's 4th husband decided to kick him out of the house, Christa went willingly with him, happily sleeping rough on the streets to stay by his side because she was so obsessed with him. And she did this for a few months before eventually returning back to her mother's. Despite Christa's many setbacks, she did originally do well in school. She was a very bright, intelligent girl. But by the time she was in 10th grade or 9th grade, something like that, she would have been 14, 15. She'd moved schools 12 times, and it eventually ended up in a juvenile detention facility after she and a friend beat a man with a stick in a car park.
Jeez.
And it was here in juvenile detention that she started to flourish, away from the abuse, away from the toxic environment that she had grown up in, surrounded by, I'd like to say, the help that she needed, but she didn't necessarily get the help that she needed. She just got a little bit more support than what she would have done if she was at home.
Yeah.
So she started to fix some of this damage that had been done by the years of abuse that she had suffered. During therapy sessions, she disclosed the abuse that she suffers. Professionals noticed that she was suffering with mental health issues, depression, bipolar, post-traumatic stress disorder. And professionals noticed how Christa's childhood affected her ability to sleep. And due to the bipolar disorder, she would sometimes be awake for like I said, 4 or 5 days at a time, and contributed to her mood swings and mental health issues. However, although she contributed in therapy sessions, group therapy sessions at this juvenile detention facility, she received next to no mental health support or medication for her issues. And she resided here for about 15 months. And while there, it was suggested to her that when she turned 17, she get a job at I say get a job, it wasn't, it was like a school program, but she joined the Job Corps program in Texas. And the Job Corps was a government-run residential program designed to help troubled teens from low-income families gain skills that they wouldn't normally have been able to get. And Christa wanted to follow in her mother's footsteps and train to become a nurse, because everyone, despite her mum saying, oh yeah, she was out of control from this age and blah, 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 she was often said about Christa that she was very caring. She was very kind. She was very compassionate. So she wanted to become a nurse. And while at the juvenile detention, despite expressing views of not wanting to be returned home, despite expressing the constant abuse that she suffered, she was eventually sent back to live with her mother and then received no further or additional help for her issues. In 1993, nearly a year after leaving juvenile detention, Christa suffered a horrendous attack near her home that just massively undone any help that she had gotten from the juvenile detention centre. And this attack actually didn't come from a family member, but from a complete stranger. She was chased down the street by a man. When he eventually caught her, he dragged her up the hill by her hair, threw her to the ground. He repeatedly raped her, all the while hitting her in the head with a rock.
Oh my God.
And 100% he would have killed her had he not been scared off by a passing car. And this car just happened to be passing, and then the attacker fled. But 100%, if that hadn't have happened, that she would have been killed. Jeez. And this is a confirmed attack based on hospital and police evidence. But police did nothing more than a preliminary investigation, and the attacker was never caught. Now, this effectively ends the story on Christa's childhood. It was a childhood marked by abuse of every kind, from every caregiver, babysitters, family members, neighbours, strangers. And we know that predators seek out the vulnerable, and Christa was a perfect target. She was a child with organic brain damage, undiagnosed bipolar disorder, unmedicated but diagnosed depression. Like I said, due to her bipolar, she was also an insomniac. She had no close relationships with anyone. The only connections she had formed were with her paternal grandmother that withered away and died in front of her eyes, and animals that were slaughtered and skinned in front of her.
That's wild to me. That is absolutely wild to me, that anyone would suffer like any abuse at all. But she has literally been passed from abuser to abuser to abuser. And like you say, even complete like strangers
think
it's okay to abuse her. that is properly wild to me that one person
can go through
have all of that abuse.
But that's
trauma.
what that's what you tend to find though, isn't it? Because they are so vulnerable, and predators, they smell that, they know that, and that they prey on the vulnerable and the weak, and that's exactly what she was. So
it's so gross.
And it's documented abuse as well. It's not, people labeled her a compulsive liar. And for the most part, she probably was, to gain some form of attention, but the abuse happened to her, and that's horrendous.
Yeah.
But despite the abuse, she was a bright, astute girl. One teacher said they saw something in her, quote, flashes that there's something special, something different, something that set her apart from other students. Christa's mother describes her as a caring, thoughtful, loving daughter, but her aunt describes her as a pathological liar, a girl out of control. But she wanted to go into a career of nursing to help others, and in 1994, she joined the Job Corps. Away from her abusive family home life, she would now get the opportunity to live away from the violence that had marked her whole life. However, at the Job Corps, violence was an everyday occurrence. Yes, it was a place for troubled teens that had had run-ins with the police, but staff did not do their job properly at all, and it seemed that the students literally ran the program. Guns, razor blades, knives were all commonly carried by students. Gang rivalry fights were a common occurrence. Violence was everywhere in there. So as a way of survival, Christa latched onto the scariest, meanest, toughest of all the students, a 17-year-old boy by the name of Tadaryl Shipp. Tadaryl Shipp was a very violent, abusive young man, and many of the other kids at the Job Corps said that Tadaryl scared the shit out of them. He walked about with razor blades in his mouth. He was part of a gang, so always carried a gun or a knife. He had previously been in trouble with the police for attempting to throw another boy off a bridge. And lastly, he had a strong interest in Satanism. Not someone that is going to be a good influence to a highly influential teenage girl. However, Christa fell madly in love with Tadaryl. And like everyone else in her life had treated her, Tadaryl was no different. He was controlling. He was abusive verbally and physically. Teachers at Job Corps witnessed seeing him kick her in the back, shove her head into the wall. And Christa says it was a very physical relationship. They fought tooth and nail, on both parts. But what everyone else saw as an abusive, coercive, controlling behaviour, Christa saw as love and protection, because he was fiercely protective of her against other people and defended her when people were horrible to her, people were bullying her, people said horrible things. And this was something that she'd never had. It never in her whole life had anyone been on her side, had anyone defended her or stood up for her. During lunch on campus one day, while she was sat down taking the braids out of Tadaryl's hair, another student accidentally bumped Christa and never apologized. And Tadaryl immediately grabbed the boy by the throat. He put a razor blade to his face and said if he even so much as breathed near her, he would slit his throat. Jesus. So this was the greatest thing ever for Christa.
Yeah.
She's been pockmarked by abuse and never had anyone defending her at all. So now she finally had somebody that loved her, cared for her. Yes, he might have been abusive to her, but that was water off a duck's back, really. That was old news. She was used to that. What was new was the attention that he gave her, good or bad. Whatever he wanted, she gave him. Whatever he wanted to do, she did. Whatever he loved, she loved. And this included his obsession with Satanism. Christa began dabbling in Satanism. She began to wear a matching pentagram necklace. Nothing or no one would stop Christa from being happy. So when rumours started to spread that another student was trying to get Tadaryl's attention, she needed to put a stop to it. So this was 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer. Now, she was different from a lot of the other students because she hadn't come from a troubled background. She wasn't a troubled teen. She was a teen from a low-income household that wanted to get the skills that she needed from college but couldn't afford to go to college. She'd left her home and family back in Florida in order to come to the Job Corps in Texas, a place that offered much more on paper than it essentially delivered. And she hated it there. Told her mum that she wanted to leave and come home pretty much as soon as she got there, really. And when rumours spread of her interest in Tadaryl, she started having run-ins with Christa. Now, there are some accounts from Christa herself that I personally don't believe, based on my research and listening to interviews with Colleen's mother. But Christa states that Colleen started to harass her, and she would find her standing over her bed in the dead of night with a box cutter. She shred all the photos that she had. She tore up all the clothes that she had. And personally, I don't believe that Colleen did that. I think Christa done that to Colleen because Colleen's mother said that she received a phone call from Colleen one day begging her to be able to come home, saying that she had woken up in the night to Christa standing over her bed with a box cutter. But no amount of denying this accusation that Colleen wanted Tadaryl, no amount of denying it made Christa happy. There was a potential threat now to the one person that cared about her, and she couldn't allow him to be taken away from her. In January 1995, a now 18-year-old Christa boasted to a friend that she wanted to kill Colleen, saying that she just felt mean that day. On the 12th of January, Tadaryl and Christa came across a friend of theirs and asked if they had seen Colleen, stating that when we find her, she's dead. Tadaryl had also stated to a friend that they needed to make a sacrifice, a human sacrifice, in a few days' time as the celestial bodies were in alignment. All of these comments fell on the ears of students, and they didn't take the threat seriously. They were accustomed to death threats at their time at the Job Corps. They were essentially desensitized to that sort of language. They throw it about, oh, I'm going to kill that person. Oh, you know, so-and-so's dead if I find them.
Yeah.
So it didn't mean anything to them. That same day, on the 12th of January, Christa, Tadaryl, and a friend of theirs, 18-year-old Shadolla Peterson, were seen by a friend of Christa's named Kim, leaving campus at around 8 p.m. with Colleen Slemmer. They had told Colleen that they wanted to make amends. And did she want to come with them to go to Blockbuster and smoke some weed? But the weed that they was going to get, they had hidden off campus in Tyson Park, which is an area surrounding the Job Corps campus. And Colleen had agreed. She was happy to try and end the conflict. She was probably the least I don't know the word, but confrontational person. Yeah, she did not want that at all. Now, this is the part you can skip ahead if you don't want to hear the details of what happens next, because trigger warning, it is graphic.
Oh God.
As the foursome entered Tyson Park, Christa confronts Colleen and they get into a verbal argument that very quickly escalated. This verbal argument was about Tadaryl, and Colleen obviously was trying to deny everything. She did not want Tadaryl. He was vicious, he was nasty, he was into Satanism, and she wasn't interested at all. But Christa would not hear it. She began attacking Colleen, hitting her in the face, pulling her hair, kneeing her repeatedly in the face. She threw her to the ground and began repeatedly kicking her and slamming her head into the concrete floor. And Colleen begged her to stop, asking her over and over, "Why are you doing this to me?" And at one point, she even tried to threaten to report Christa at the Job Corps in order to get her to stop. This threat, though, didn't have the desired effect because Christa was actually on her last warning at the Job Corps for violent behaviour. One more misdemeanor and she was out. So this threat made Christa even more angry, and she didn't let up the onslaught of beating, kicking, hitting, hair pulling. Colleen managed to stand up at one point and attempted to run away. However, Tadaryl rugby tackled her to the ground. And Christa and Tadaryl held Colleen down until she stopped fighting and then dragged her to a more secluded area a few feet away. And they forced her to strip off her shirt and bra. And it was here that Christa pulled out a box cutter and she began cutting open Colleen's stomach, cutting her arms, cutting her face. Colleen's screams of agony did absolutely nothing to stop Christa. However, when Christa paused her attack for a moment to watch Colleen bleed, Colleen managed to get up and run. But with her back now bare, facing Christa, she produced a second weapon, a small meat cleaver, and she used that to slice open Colleen's back.
Oh my God.
A cut that Christa referred to as, quote, the long, big cut on her back. And she fell to the floor, and Christa began attacking her again, hitting her, kicking, cutting, stabbing Colleen everywhere and anywhere. But Colleen was a fighter, man. Despite her injuries and the fact that there were 3 attackers and only her, she managed to get up and try to escape multiple times. But each time she got up to run, she was tackled back down to the ground. And she continued to beg for her life, to talk to Christa and humanize herself. She told Christa that if she let her go, she would be gone. She would walk back to Florida. She wouldn't even collect her things from Job Corps. And Christa shouted at her, stop talking, hitting her repeatedly, kicking her in the face. And through the blood pouring out of her face and filling her mouth, Colleen asked the question she knew the answer to already. What are you going to do with me? At that point, Christa thought she heard a noise in the distance, and she stopped the attack. She asked Tadaryl to go and check it out, not wanting to be disturbed or caught. And he left for a short while, searching in the semi-darkness for a cause of the noise, but found nothing except a dirty rag that he found by the bin. He brought it back and tied it over Colleen's mouth to keep her quiet. Christa brought the box cutter down to Colleen and began cutting her throat. Oh. Despite this, Colleen continued to try and talk and fight. Christa cut Colleen's throat several more times, but still, Colleen continued to fight, sitting up and pushing at Christa, and each time she would be pushed back down to the ground by one of the 3 attackers. At one point, Colleen managed to get free, despite having her throat cut multiple times, one of which was so deep it exposed the fat and muscle.
Oh, God.
But Colleen tried to run for her life. As she ran, Christa found a chunk of concrete nearby. As she picked it up and threw it at Colleen's head as she ran, Tadaryl also threw a chunk of concrete, hitting Colleen in the head. She fell to the ground, and Christa pounced on her again, picking up the chunk of concrete and using it to hit Colleen in the face and head over and over. While Colleen struggled to breathe through the blood, Christa asked her, "Do you know who's doing this to you?" Colleen's response was a gurgling moan. She was still alive, still breathing. Christa wasn't finished yet, though. She and Tadaryl took the box cutter and carved a pentagram onto Colleen's chest and forehead. Then he and the others grabbed Colleen's feet and dragged her to an area near some trees and left her on a pile of dirt. They hid her clothes in the surrounding bushes, washed their hands in a muddy puddle, and left. They went to the nearby gas station to wash themselves more thoroughly. disposed of some of Colleen's personal items, and then headed back to campus. So if you've skipped forward of the details, this is where you can return. However, there will still be some mention of the crime and also some details from the autopsy report. If you don't wish to hear those details, just skip the episode. The same person that saw all 4 students leave earlier that evening witnessed them coming back around 10:15 p.m. without Colleen. Later that night, Christa went and visited a friend in her dorm room named Kim. Now, Kim is the person that Christa had mentioned that she'd wanted to kill Colleen, and she's also the person that witnessed the 4 leave and 3 come back.
Right.
When Christa entered Kim's room, Kim said she was ecstatic, dancing around. She had verbal diarrhea and began to tell Kim everything that had just happened. How she had cut Colleen's throat 6 times with the box cutter. How she had thrown a large chunk of concrete at her head that on impact broke up into smaller pieces. And then how she and the others had thrown them at Colleen also. And as she recounted the horrific details, she laughed, danced. She was like, la, 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 la. But so at no point did Kim take her seriously because of her demeanour. She still didn't take her seriously when Christa dug into her pocket and pulled something out. A souvenir, she told Kim. What Christa held in her hands was a piece of Colleen's skull.
Oh, God.
That in itself just goes to show how devastating her injuries were. How much aggression Christa used when hitting Colleen with the concrete. She had fractured her skull so badly that it was exposed enough for Christa to reach down and through the blood and brain matter spilling out, take a piece of Colleen's skull.
Oh, my God. I've never heard anything so vile.
The next morning, Kim couldn't shake off what Christa had told her. She didn't believe it, but she just couldn't get it out of her mind. So at breakfast, she found Christa and asked her what had she done with the piece of Colleen's skull that she had. And Christa said it was in her pocket and said, quote, "And yes, I'm eating breakfast with it." Later that morning, during a class, she also told another student of what she had done to Colleen. She also pointed to the brown spots on her shoes and said, "That ain't mud on my shoes, that's blood." She also pulled out the piece of skull from her pocket and showed the other student. Both students didn't take Christa seriously and never took the confessions seriously either. An employee of Job Corps out walking the grounds that morning stumbled upon what he described as a mangled animal and wanted to take a closer look. It was the body of Colleen Slemmer, and police were quickly called and descended on the area. When police arrived, they found an area literally covered in Colleen's blood. They found leaves that were so saturated in her blood that they were still dripping. There were pools of blood marking the different locations that Colleen had been attacked. They found handprints, knee prints, drag marks. The crime scene ended up being an area of about 100 feet by 60 feet. Jesus. When they located Colleen's body, she was naked from the waist up. Her torso, arms and head, nothing but a red, bloody mess. No area of her body was clear of blood. Police described looking at her body and not knowing whether she was face up or face down due to the severity of damage to her head. Around 4 or 5 p.m. that day, police had cordoned off the area. Guess who shows up? Christa and 4 or 5 other females attended the scene. Officers described Christa as amused, giggling, laughing. She asked the detective why the area was cordoned off, who the victim was, and whether or not the police had any suspects. While Christa was amusing herself asking questions that she already knew the answer to, the detective couldn't help but notice the pentagram necklace dangling from her neck, and knowing that Colleen had a pentagram carved into her body, he immediately reported Christa and her odd behaviour to his superiors. The next morning, Christa was taken in for questioning. And when I say taken in for questioning, the detective didn't need to ask her anything, really. Christa was all too happy to gleefully confess to everything that she had done. I think the confession tape was something like 9 hours long. Correct me if that's wrong. I do remember seeing it somewhere, but then I couldn't find it again once I'd found it. During the confession, she told police that Colleen was threatening her and running her mouth. She said that she hadn't planned to kill her, but once the attack started, it got out of control. She said that she had made Colleen strip half naked in an attempt to make her stop trying to run away. She felt that if her boobs were out, then she would be too embarrassed to run. She took police back to the area and gave them a run through of what happened. This is what happened here. That's what happened over there. She showed them all the spots of blood on her shoes, and she said that she tried to cover them with mud to get rid of some of the blood. She told them that if Colleen went back to Job Corps and told of the attack, that she knew she would be chucked out, so she couldn't let her go. She said Colleen wouldn't stop talking to her, and it was hard to continue attacking her while she spoke. She said that Colleen kept getting up and just wouldn't die. She never named her accomplices. However, it wasn't long before Tadaryl and Shadolla were picked up and arrested. I'm now going to tell you about Colleen's autopsy.
Okay.
Dr. Elkins performed Colleen's autopsy. She said that her body was covered in dirty twigs, or dirt, twigs, and blood. She was naked from the waist up, wearing only jeans, socks, and shoes. After removing Colleen's clothing and washing her body, Dr. Elkins attempted to catalogue the numerous cut stab wounds on Colleen's upper body by assigning each one a letter of the alphabet. There are 26 letters of the alphabet, just to remind everybody. There were so many wounds on Colleen's upper body that Dr. Elkins decided to only catalogue the most serious of wounds. She said that to number all of the wounds would require her to go through the alphabet numerous times, and that it would have taken at least 3 days. In the end, Dr. Elkins, quote, threw up her hands and just said innumerable superficial slash wounds on the back, arms, and chest. Innumerable. Idiot. Let that sink in for a moment. Colleen sustained so many stab wounds to her body that they couldn't be counted. All the while pleading for her life, fighting her attackers, and attempting to run away. Dr. Elkins said Colleen sustained major slash and stab wounds on her back, arms, abdomen, and chest. A 6-inch gaping wound across the middle of her neck, which had been deep enough to open it completely up and display the fat and muscle beneath. In addition to this, Dr. Elkins found 10 more slash wounds on her throat and other slash wounds on her face, plus the pentagram carved on her chest. Dr. Elkins said that Colleen had purple contusions on her knees, indicating fresh bruising consistent with crawling, and defensive wounds on her right arm. When I say this girl fought for her life, she did not stop fighting until the very end. And that's what makes this case so much worse, because Dr. Elkins said that the area around each wound, each innumerable wound, was red, indicating Colleen's heart had been beating with each wound that was inflicted. She said that Colleen would not have been rendered unconscious by any of the slash or stab wounds. She concluded that Colleen had suffered a minimum of 4 blows to her head, 2 to the left side, 1 over her right eye, and 1 in the nose area. The right frontal area of her skull had been fractured, as had the bridge of her nose. The most serious and deadly blow was on the left side of her head. Dr. Elkins said that this blow was so impactful that it also fractured the right side of Colleen's skull. So where her head had been resting on the floor, the blow had crushed the left side and also fractured the right side. And embedded parts of her skull into her brain. And there were also chunks of concrete lodged into Colleen's skull and brain. And finally, Dr. Elkins determined that blood in her sinus cavity and lungs indicated that she had been alive and probably conscious when the blows were inflicted, and she had essentially drowned in her own blood. Dr. Elkins had to remove Colleen's entire head from her body, to remove her brain, remove the fragments of bone, and try to piece together her skull. And when this was done, there was actually a piece of her skull missing. And after detectives found the bone in Christa's pocket, it was determined that this piece of bone fit perfectly. Christa had indeed taken a piece of Colleen's skull as a souvenir. Christa, Tadaryl, and Shadolla were all tried separately. However, they were all part of the crime. Shadolla was part of the crime. Tadaryl was part of the crime. They all had some form of... none of them stood by and just watched. However, Shadolla turned informant and cooperated with the police, even though Christa had been more than happy to confess and showed them around the crime scene, and they didn't really need an informant. So for her part in the torture and murder of Colleen, she received 6 years of probation, no time served. She was completely out, free to do, to roam the streets and do what she wanted. Tadaryl, being 17 years old at the time, received life in prison with the possibility of parole, and his parole is due in 2028. And Christa, a few months into being 18 years old at the time, was sentenced to death by electrocution. And this is the controversial part of this story. Should Christa Pike have received the death penalty for her crimes?
Yes.
There have been numerous appeals over the year, most of which I've read, and that's where I got most of this information from the court documents. And they all state that Christa's defense team at the time were ill-equipped to deal with such a high-profile case. They didn't submit any mitigating evidence, nothing about her childhood, her abuse, her mental health disorders, her organic brain damage that meant her consequential thinking wasn't what it should be. Numerous other cases that had been tried in the same court with similar crimes or crimes involving more than one murder that weren't given the death sentence. Numerous studies stating that a child of 18 doesn't have the cognitive ability of that of an adult and therefore shouldn't be held accountable in the same way. She was only 18 by a few months, whereas Tadaryl was only a few months away from being 18, yet he was automatically ineligible to receive the death penalty. Christa was assessed by multiple professionals after her arrest, diagnosed with bipolar, diagnosed with personality or borderline personality disorder, diagnosed with depression. But they also showed that she was extremely bright. She was excellent at problem solving, reasoning, analysis. She could pay attention to things, sustain concentration, had excellent receptive and expressive language, and had an IQ of 111, which professionals said was remarkable, given that she dropped out of school in the 9th, 10th grade. The doctor concluded that the tests unequivocally showed that Christa had no symptoms of brain damage and that she was not insane. Christa claimed that she had not planned to kill Colleen, but that the situation had gotten out of control and that she couldn't stop the attack once it had started, which people say is because of her frontal lobe damage, the compulsive control. She couldn't stop once it had started. However, that was proven to be bullshit because Colleen stopped the attack numerous times. Once because she thought she heard someone, Other times when Colleen got up to run off, and Tadaryl dragged her back. Christa has spent 40-something years on death row, solitary confinement, in a shoebox-sized cell, only permitted to leave for 1 hour a day. In 2001, 5 years into her sentence, Christa attacked another inmate. There'd been some sort of fire in the prison, and Christa and two other female inmates, were held together in a cell while they were like dealing with whatever had happened. And one of the other women attacked the other woman, and Christa intervened. She took a shoelace or a bootlace that she'd brought with her and strangled the attacker until she was unconscious. She was charged and convicted of attempted third-degree murder. And in a podcast interview with Christa, she says, quote, "They charged me with attempted murder because I'm Christa Pike and they like to make an example of me. If I'd wanted to kill her, she would have been dead." End quote. But maintains that she doesn't deserve to be on death row. In 2012, Christa was involved in some sort of prison escape scandal. A prison guard and a man that visited Christa conspired together to smuggle Christa out of prison. The prison guard lost his job, and the other man that was helping Christa received 7 years in prison. Christa received no sentence due to the lack of evidence that she was party to the attempted escape. They couldn't say that she was involved in it, which is stupid.
Yeah.
I believe Christa has exhausted all of her appeals and is currently awaiting an execution date. If Christa is executed, she will be the first woman in 200 years to be executed in Tennessee. So my question to you is, do you think Christa Pike deserved the death sentence now that you have heard the entire story? I have my opinion, and I've made a few notes that we'll discuss after, but I obviously want to hear your thoughts. But before I do, I just want to leave you with one further piece of information. After being sentenced to death, from her prison cell, Christa wrote a letter to Tadaryl. The letter read, "You see what I get for trying to be nice to the hoe? I went ahead and bashed her brains out so she'd die quickly instead of letting her bleed to death and suffer more, and they fucking fry me. Ain't that some shit?"
Ain't that some shit indeed?
Ain't that some shit?
I think they should fry her.
Done.
That is what I think. Yeah.
Despite her childhood.
Absolutely, despite her childhood.
Despite her mental health problems.
Yeah. Because if she'd attacked someone and if she'd attacked someone and they had, you know, fallen and hit their head and they died, or, you know, she'd got in a fight with someone and, you know, she'd maybe gone a little bit over the top, that is excessive. That is planned out. I understand that she's probably thinking, I need to protect what I've got with Tadaryl. Like, I get that. I understand that. And she's probably in massive fight or flight mode. And she probably would be for the rest of her life because of her childhood. I get that. But she beat that girl until she was pretty much mince. And that is so vicious and so unnecessary. And the fact that she's laughing about it afterwards and being like, oh yeah, you know, I did her a mercy, and that hoe and all that, referring to her like that, like, you've fucked it. Like, you just need to be off this planet and start again in a new life. I feel bad for her childhood. Like, I get that, and no person should go through that. But
Do you
just the whole
think
time you were talking about it, I was putting myself in that girl's position and feeling what it would feel like to be hit in the face repeatedly with a piece of concrete, so much so that your skull shatters so that someone can reach in your head and pull out a piece of bone?
Mhm.
No, this is so over the top. It's yeah.
do you
Sorry.
do you think that had she grown up with her paternal grandmother who loved her, and if she wasn't abused the way that she was, but the situation was the same with someone trying to take her boyfriend, do you think she would have committed that crime?
Possibly not. No.
So do you not think that she deserved some sort of mercy for because almost her childhood contributed to the crime,
I think
and that was out of her control?
I think the mercy and the teaching and the learning should have come sooner. It should have happened before that. Like she should have absolutely. She was let down by everyone in her life. I get that, but not everybody that goes through horrendous trauma goes on to do horrendous things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That it was so brutal, so brutal that if she had any good in her, at any point she could have stopped and gone, that's enough.
Do
But
you think that perhaps the reason that it was so brutal was because she was unleashing all that rage that she had in her from everything that had been done to her as a child? That
more
was
than
like a
likely,
release.
yeah, more than likely. But that other girl was nothing to do with that. If it was like one of these cases where the person that's being abused like snaps and they beat their abuser, to literally to a pulp, that I get. And I get that it was probably, symbolic of, she was doing that and she saw every face of every abuser as she was, landing every blow. But you can't do that. You can't kill an innocent person in such a brutal fashion and then
I
expect to be excused for it because you've had a shit life so far.
I am 100% with you. I also believe that she should have been due the death penalty. I feel like Tadaryl probably also should have been as well,
Absolutely.
despite his age. But I'm just bringing you some points that I've heard raised.
Okay.
That kind of got me thinking a little bit, because I actually don't believe that she would have committed this crime had she have not suffered the abuse that she did. So therefore, that abuse has some effect on her. That should
Yeah.
that's not her fault, but also at the same time, that abuse, yes, she might have been releasing rage that she'd found. She did not have to take a piece of Colleen's skull. That is depravity in another level. That's nothing to do with the rage that she might have been feeling. She 100% has consequential thinking.
Yeah.
When they were like, oh, she doesn't understand the consequences. She did. She took her to an isolated area so that they wouldn't be stopped. She stopped when she thought she heard someone because she didn't want to be caught.
Yeah.
Some professionals said that the reason that she was so ecstatic and so dancing around and la 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 was a trauma response to what she had done. At no point has Christa ever meaningfully apologize. She doesn't come
Show
across
any kind of regret. Yeah.
No, she doesn't come across that she has remorse of any kind at all. If you listen to interviews with her, she's very, poor me, I've got to sit in this cell 23 hours a day, poor me, this is what happens. poor me, they've sentenced me, they've tried me for attempted murder because I tried to strangle someone, but I'm Christa Pike and they like to make an example of me. So, and at no point either does she say, listen, I flipped out and I saw all of my attackers in the face of Colleen, and that's why I did what I did. And, you know, at no point does she say that at all. So I don't think that that's it either. I do think that there's no coming back from that. But I do think that it was massively influenced by the fact that she suffered such a horrendous childhood, because she had nobody and all of a sudden she's got somebody, and the fear of that being taken away was so great that she was willing to do something quite as horrendous as this.
Yeah, and violence was a normal response for her.
Yeah.
Like, you know, ever since she was born, she would have people that were supposed to love her and care for her that would be physically violent to her. And so that absolutely would play a part in your brain. We were talking to the kids the other day about you know, people that are brought up with violence, and it becomes a normal thing.
Well, you go one of two ways, don't you? You're either the complete opposite. You either learn what you know, violence, or you go the complete opposite and you're not violent because you've seen that and you don't want that for your life.
Yeah. But to us, you know, in our family, if someone, you know, if there was a child that punched their parent in the face, for us, we'd be like, oh my God, it would be like the worst thing. Do you know what I mean? It would be so out of character and like, what, you know, why would you think that that's okay? But then Claire works with families where that happens on a daily basis, you know, where the kid will like properly punch their mother in the face, you know, and by tea time it's sort of pretty much forgotten about, you know, and it's like, oh well, she was having a bad morning and that's why she lashed out and I said something that she didn't like and all that. And it's like, this is not okay behavior. Do you know what I mean? But it depends on what your upbringing is and what you're used to in that. So I completely get that for her, you know, all levels of violence and, you know, abuse would be pretty normal, you know. And she's like, well, yeah, I mean, that happens. It's not that big of a deal. So she obviously took it further, I know, but
her defense all the time was that she was trying to take Tadaryl from me. She was running her mouth. She was, you know, if she did stand over in the night with a box cutter, those for her, those are all reasons that she did that validation.
Yeah.
She was like, well, I had to because she was running her mouth. I had to do that because this is what was happening.
Well, that's
even
what
if she was trying to,
if
she was trying to get Tadaryl, that still doesn't justify the actions. But for her, they do.
Nothing at all justifies those actions. Nothing, unless she'd turned into a vampire and was trying to, you know, bite her face off or something, you know, and she had to do that to make sure she was dead. There's just nothing. There's nothing in my mind anyway that can justify doing that to someone. I really can't.
And the reason, because a lot of people will be like, oh, you know, glorifying it and whatever else. But I feel like the reason that I had to put in all that information was because Colleen went through that.
Yeah.
You know, she didn't skip over those details. She lived through, well, she didn't live through it, but she was living while all of that happened.
That is how her life ended.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't want to skip over it and whatever else. Like, yes,
if people feel like that, if people feel like us talking about these things and giving such detail and things like that, then no problem, no offense. Just don't listen to our podcast, because that is why we're doing the podcast. And we shouldn't just be talking about like the murderers and the abusers and all that. The victims are the ones that need airtime as well. You know, they're the people that we need to think about and concentrate on as well. You know, we can't just have these people's the absolute like complete end of their life and we're like, well, yeah, you know, we'll just skip past that. It should be spoken about, and I
Yeah.
believe that it should be, and it gives you, I suppose, an appreciation of what these people went through.
Yeah, on some level, I don't think. I mean, this attack lasted between 30 minutes and 45 minutes on
Oh,
Christa's account. And if you've ever been in a situation where you're fearful,
yeah.
every second is long. If you're in that state, if you're in a fight or, you know,
Mm.
anything, every second seems like an hour. So to be going through that and you know, be conscious throughout the entire thing, that's horrendous.
Yeah.
That she was conscious throughout until the very, very end. I mean, she slit her throat 10 times and she was
Honestly,
still
I
able
can't
to
even
try and get up
imagine.
and run.
I cannot
Yeah.
even imagine. Oh, I felt all choked up then.
Oh,
I cannot imagine what her parents felt.
yeah, absolutely. Knowing those details is something that you'll
Mm.
just never forget. Never, ever.
No.
No. And there are pictures as well of the crime scene and of Colleen's body. There are pictures on the internet, but I suggest not looking for them. I mean, we won't post them anywhere.
No.
Don't look for them.
No.
They're not they're not pleasant, and they do show the grotesqueness of the assault.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just awful. But the
Yeah, I won't.
reasons
I won't look.
no. So when this was first told to me, and it was like, oh yeah, she was 18, she was sentenced to death, and it's labeled as a satanic thing. It's
Mm.
because of the pentagram. It's labeled as a, you know, she done it because she was dabbling in the occult or Satanism, things like that. That's not the reason that she
No.
done this. That was just like a side piece.
Yeah.
So when I first came across it, I was like, oh, I didn't, you know, see much about it. But she she was doing it to please Tadaryl.
Yeah.
She wasn't doing it for Satanism. She wasn't doing it, you know, as a sacrifice. She was doing it to please Daryl because Tadaryl was the person that meant most to her.
Yeah. No, definitely. That's definitely how it comes across to me as well.
Yeah.
Oh.
But yeah, sorry that was such a horrendous one, but it was requested.
No, it was good. I just feel really emotional.
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right.
Oh, yeah, it's very very hard to research. I kept having to take a lot of
Yeah.
breaks and things on it, but
Thanks.
if your kids are displaying some sort of tendencies, get them help, man.
Yeah, just get help as soon as possible if you know, because you can't be bringing other people into it. You can't be destroying other lives because of it. Ugh. Right, I'm gonna go and curl up in a ball and cry in the corner.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, thanks, Poddy. That was
That's all
really
right.
well researched, and it must have been really hard.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I'll see you on the next one. We'll make the next one a little bit more
Yeah.
upbeat.
Yeah, I know what story I'm doing.
All right.
It's not emotional, it's not brutal or anything like that. In parts it is quite funny. So yeah,
Great.
you can all look forward to that. And we'll be back next Tuesday as normal.
Yep.
So have a good week.
Farewell.
Farewell.
Bye.
Bye.
If you have enjoyed listening to our episodes, make sure you rate us and leave us a review on whatever platform you are listening.
We absolutely love hearing from you guys. So you can also help support our show by donating to our Buy Me a Coffee link. We will make sure that you get a massive shout out and a big thank you in our next week's episode.
You can also follow us on social media at Perplexed Podcasts. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and if you want to see more videos and blooper reels, subscribe to our TikTok and YouTube channels.
You can also email us your stories at perplexedpodcasts@gmail.com.
And you can find all the relevant links in the episode descriptions. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.